You guys talking about the Krulek movie? Are you talking about the Krulek movie, the Zeppelin movie? Have you seen it?
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, I really want to see it.
Yeah, it's like you have to go see it, one of those exhibitions they put on with like with like him doing Q&A and stuff, and I saw it and it's hilarious.
Don't mind us, we're just talking about Led Zeppelin. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming so early. I know it's really, really hard to drag our butts here after being out partying and whatever we got up to last night. I was definitely tempted to sleep in, but I didn't want to miss out on any of the amazing conversations that we've got lined up for day 2 of Summit. By the way, my name's Casey Ray. I'm the Interim Executive Director for Future of Music Coalition. That doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, so you can just call me Casey. We have some really exciting stuff lined up today. We're going to be talking about everything from creative culture as a driver for social action, to nonprofit business models for independent music, to musicians and health insurance access. And then I'm going to have a far-out conversation with a dear friend of mine, Sandy Perlman, who is a legendary producer. I have no idea where that's going to go, so it'll be a white-knuckle thrill ride. Then we're going to hear from FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, because we're always looking to find those interesting connections between the music community and the policymaking space, and Jessica has tons of that, and I think you'll really appreciate what she has to say. And then later, to close off the day, after the breakout sessions, we're going to have a really interesting freewheeling conversation with Bob Boylan of NPR and many of our artist friends, some of whom you might have encountered last night at the benefit show. So that's a taste of what's to come today. I just want to say thank you for making this summit really special. Also, thank you to our amazing staff. And I've been instructed to inform you all that today is our event organizer Hannah Byam's birthday. We honestly could not have done this without Hannah. She's like a warrior princess to me. I am in awe of her skills. So as we drag Hannah out for you all to see, this means you have to be extra special nice to Hannah. So she's wearing pink, so she'll be easy to identify. Give her a big hug, and bring her treats. Do you want me to sing happy birthday to you?
I've already been serenaded.
Okay, good, because I really don't want to do that. It's too early in the morning. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Hannah. Happy birthday to you. Thank you, Hannah, seriously. It is my genuine pleasure to introduce my friend and peer at Georgetown University, Anna Chalenza from the music department, who is going to talk a little bit about how Georgetown has helped us and assisted us in making this a really exciting summit for you all, and hopefully for the university as well. And she will also introduce our first speaker, Josh Kuhn. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you all for being here. I'm actually in the Department of Performing Arts here at Georgetown. Music and theater and dance and public speaking are all in one department. But I'm in charge of the music program. And it's amazing to be part of this experience. We've had FMC on campus for a number of years now, and it's a fabulous opportunity for our students, not only to hear what's happening right now in the world, but also to connect with all of you. And I know there were a lot of students here yesterday, and I saw many of you talking with them, so I just want to say thank you for being so open with them. Some of them came up to me yesterday after the day was over and went, I don't think I'm going to do the music industry anymore. You know, they sort of a little bit afraid. Yet I also had 2 or 3 that came up and went, I am so doing this now. Like you really set the challenge. So I think this is the best education they can get. And this is a type of education we can't do in a book. We can't do it in a classroom. So it means a great deal to us. Our department is pretty new. It was founded in 2007. And our music program is not on the conservatory model. So if we have a student that comes to us and says, I really want to be first violinist in the New York Philharmonic someday, we say Peabody is great and it's about 40 miles down the road. We're very much, when we created our apartment, we got to start from scratch, and we said, what do people think about when they think about Georgetown? They think about public policy, they think about politics, they think about social justice and engaging in the community. Georgetown's a Jesuit university, although it's very diverse. Many of us, aren't Catholics. But one thing you might not know, and me being a music historian, I'm going to give you a little history here. The Jesuits, when they were first founded, music was one of their primary tools, and they used music as a way to build community. And I see FMC at Georgetown as us continuing that part of the Jesuit tradition of really connecting, talking, building community, making community. I think it's really important to all of us to remember that music doesn't just exist out as something that we have as a background or as wallpaper or whatever you want to call it, that it is something that brings people together, either in all sitting in the same room. We've all had those amazing experiences of being in the audience, like last night, to hear all the performers last night at the honors dinner. But we also know what it's like to be listening to a new tune on our iPad or with our earbuds, and knowing that there are a lot of other people listening to that same tune at the same time, and in a way you kind of feel connected with them, and then you go online and you write about it and you read what other people have to say. So even if we're just doing it online, we're still building a community, a virtual community that reaches beyond the classroom. And I think what's great about FMC is we've got that virtual community, but once a year we get to come together here, and so it means quite a bit to all of us. That being said, I'd also like to note that the co-founders of FMC are Georgetown graduates, so we are very proud to have those alums back. And we're also proud to connect with lots of other academics. One thing that's talked about is the next generation. How are we going to educate them? This is a great place to do that, and it's great for me to be able to introduce a great educator, speaker, intellectual, not only in the scholarly sense, but in the public sense, and that's Josh Kuhn. In fact, I just met him back in the green room, and I was sitting right next to him, and he introduced himself, and I went, "Oh, I know you from your writing." And someone next to me went, "You know him from his writing?" So one thing that this comes up about Josh Kuhn is he wears many hats. So in addition to being an academic, I know him from that reputation, he's also an author and a music critic. He's also an associate professor of communication at the Annenberg School at the University of Southern California, which is an amazing they have an amazing graduate program, and he has a joint appointment in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity. How do I know him? From a book called Audiotopia, Music, Race, and America that he wrote. Also another great book, Sound Clash, Listening to American Studies. In addition to writing and teaching, he also is the director of the Popular Music Project at USC, and that's at their Norman Lear Center, and he's the co-editor of a book series called Refiguring American Music, which is put out by Duke University Press, my alma mater. Got to slip that in there. He serves on a lot of boards, and I think this is important, that we don't just exist in the university setting, but that we also connect with people in many ways. So he doesn't just do music, he also does all sorts of other arts. So for example, he's on the board of Dub Lab, of the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions. He has been a consultant curator with the Los Angeles Public Library, the Walt Disney Concert Hall, the Autry National Center, and the Santa Monica Museum of Art. So for me, it is a huge honor to bring in not only a leader and a public intellectual, but from what I've heard, a really great educator as well. So Josh Kuhn, let me welcome you to the stage.
Morning, everybody. I know it's early. Thank you for coming out. Get the energy going. Yes? Yes, that's what I like to hear. So first I want to thank Michael Bracey for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm incredibly honored and excited. to be here. I've been following the work of FMC for a long time, and to be able to be in the mix here is really terrific. And Hannah, for all of your, Hannah Birthday Girl, for all of your incredible work in making everything run so smoothly. I want to preface that what I'm going to present right now is actually a very short and lo-fi version of a project I'm working on with a Brooklyn-based DJ named J Period. And traditionally, J Period and I do this together with him on stage with me. So there's a phantom Jewish hip-hop DJ right here next to me. So you can imagine him. But in that spirit, I will actually let J Period kick it off.
Some of the people can be half right part of the time. All of the people can be part right some of the time. But all of the people can't be all right all of the time. T.S. Eliot said that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So to start us off, I'm going to take one turntable, and I'm going to cue up a little George Steiner, the French, Jewish, Viennese critic who in 1971 got on the mic at Harvard University to do his own version of T.S. Eliot Said That, when he gave the T.S. Eliot Memorial Lectures and put Eliot's notes on the definition of culture on his own turntable and gave it a remix. Notes on a redefinition of culture, he called it. And this was its chorus. The old traditions are dying. The reign of Europe is over. The new culture is a sound culture. The new sound sphere is global. It ripples at great speed across languages, ideologies, frontiers, and races. The triplet pounding at me, Steiner said, through the wall on a winter night in the northeastern United States is most probably reverberating at the same moment in a dance hall in Bogota, off a transistor in Narvik, via jukebox in Kiev, and an electric guitar in Benghazi. The politics of Eden come loud. So don't fear if you hear a foreign sound to your ear. George Steiner said that. Now on another turntable, I'm going to cue up somebody else, a little Richard Wadman, about as unknown to the mainstream and admired by his disciples as Steiner was his. Wadman, the British engineer who worked for the tech company Citronic, and in 1977 built the SMP 101, the first DJ mixer specifically designed to have a horizontal crossfader on it. The first DJ mixer, of course, had already been built in 1965 by Alex Rosner, but it was all twisting knobs and vertical sliders, which meant you could have T.S. Eliot on one channel and Bob Dylan on the other, but getting from one to the other was bound to be bumpy. And if you wanted, like George Steiner did, to jump back and forth, to define and redefine, to juggle eras and decades, well, Richard Wadman knew it could be much smoother. The crossfader was a solution to an energy crisis. How to sustain flow and current when moving from one source to another, and how do you move from left to right to left to right to left to right again without losing your step or your bounce? How do we make it sound like Bob Dylan was right all along? Not only did T.S. Eliot say what he didn't say, but he said it over Black Rob's Ready Break. And with the birth of the crossfader, it was hard to tell when the foreign sound began and the familiar sound ended. Because what the crossfader did was de-verticalize the slide. It de-verticalized the world. The familiar and the foreign became, suddenly, 7 years after George Steiner said it would, horizontal. Which is to say that a new geometry of cultural encounter, a new aesthetic of cultural redefinition was upon us, and we are all crossfaders now. In 1969, Joseph Sadler, an aspiring Bronx DJ originally from Barbados, caught a set by Pete Jones, one of Manhattan's top club DJs. And Jones would spin 2 copies of the same record, say James Brown or People's Choice or B.B. King, so that he could isolate and then repeat what used to be called the breakdown, the drum-heavy section of the song that ignited the dance floor. And Sadler watched Jones extend seconds into minutes and moments into rhythmic soliloquies, using a basic Sony microphone mixer and a pair of headphones to cue up a part of the record on one turntable and then cue up the same part on the other, over and over again, to create a ping-pong effect between the same part of the song. It was the beginning, of course, of what is now called a loop. And Sadler would also see it at work back in the Bronx at parties by DJs like Kool Herc. And while Sadler liked what he saw, he wanted to take the act of moving between records, or moving even between the same records, to the next level. So when he DJ'd parties as Grandmaster Flash in the late 70s, he began to rely on the same practice that was fueling Richard Wadman. Flash brought the art of the crossfader into the party music we now call hip-hop, to create what he dubbed his quick mix theory, treating spinning records like ticking clocks and treating songs like patience on a table ready to be cut, backspun, and backed up on themselves. Africa Bambaataa might have been a better selector. He might have had a deeper record collection with more eclectic tastes and might have been able to flip Kraftwerk into psychedelic rock. But Flash was interested in the mix more than taste. He was, after all, like Richard Wadman, a working engineer. He studied resistors and transformers, and he could customize a cheapo mixer and jack in a homemade headphone cue. He wanted to develop the science of not just playing the percussive breaks of his favorite records. He wanted to develop the science of flow. He wanted to connect those breaks to each other without ever losing the beat. So, of course, if you turn on contemporary pop, R&B, and hip-hop radio right now, it's nearly impossible not to hear the influence of the crossfader. The mix, we've been told, is the new normal. And like the French curator Nicolas Bourriaud has written, we live in the age of post-production, where to participate in contemporary culture is to constantly create new cultural objects out of pre-existing ones. Fixing it in post is now where art begins, not where it ends. Sure, it's been that way ever since King Tubby flipped a love song into a canyon of ricocheting dub echo in his Kingston, Jamaica studio back in the 1970s. But the fact that mixers started moving the crossfader from the side of the machine to the center of the machine was symbolic of its new place and how culture was being made. Using different pre-existing sound sources to create a new composition that flaunted what it was defined by, the mix, set a new standard. And as sampling technology took off in the 1980s and 1990s, it became common sense that songs were assemblages of pre-existing parts. And what made one song better than another song was not the parts themselves, but how those parts were put together, how one song faded in and out of the other, how playback speeds were shifted to create startling hybrid creatures, sonic Frankensteins that defied the logics of place, space, and time. With the crossfader, the emphasis was on the skill of the mix. The trick of the crossfader is to find the sweet spot of commonality between two different songs, a matching tempo, a shared beat, a common hand clap, and no matter how fast or how fleeting, use the point of connection to move between the two sources. When a DJ is mixing, the emphasis is not on the song as an entity unto itself. It's on the point where the song connects to another song. It's about finding points of commonality between two different sources. For the DJ, the different and the common do not cancel each other out. Difference is what makes commonality possible. The DJ then is a connection hunter, and the mix is the communion of disparate souls. When you find the spot to connect, the right moment to combine, that's when the mix starts. So, for example, you could start with one song playing on one turntable, like this one. And then you can crossfade it into a song on another turntable to get this. So that Eleanor Rigby becomes Dillanor Rigby. Or one track by one artist, continent number 6, can end up on multiple turntables and go from France to Canada to northern Mexico to New York City. And a song that Kanye West called Power can become a song that a Tribe Called Red calls Indigenous Power. Or you could start with this one, a little love on a two-way street, from the Moments. If you were to take this and simply put this beat under it from Isaac Hayes, and you crossfade the two of those together, you get this. Here come the moments.
Yeah, I'm out at Brooklyn. Now I'm down in Tribeca, right next to the Narrow, but I'll be hood forever.
Now, in order to pull this off, of course, crossfading has a few prerequisites that I want to share. One, to be a crossfader, you must have a relationship with the archives, with the crates. Crossfading happens in the present tense, but it requires a historical sensibility, an archaeologist's love of the dig, the desire to reanimate the past into new forms that you need. In order to do that, you need your own stacks, your own library to draw from. And the better you know your sources, the more powerful your mix will be. But crossfading also requires an art of listening. You need to listen closely. Unlike hearing, which is generally passive, listening is explicitly active. It requires attention. It requires honing. It's a muscle that we need to keep working out. But crossfading is also about understanding the vulnerabilities and sensitivities of dialogue, knowing where to come in, knowing when to interrupt, when to listen, when to be silent, when to be closed, and when to be open. The best DJs listen for the places where they can fit in, spaces of possibility, perforations in the already finished, where with a flick of a fader, they can let their voice be heard. And lastly, the job of the crossfader is not only to mix, but to use the mix to move the crowd. And after all, what is a crowd? It's a community, a new public. So the job of the crossfader is to create and sustain new publics. An example of this in action. At the beginning of the last century, a British playwright named Israel Zangwill wrote a play called The Melting Pot about an immigrant coming to America. The protagonist decided that he wanted to write a symphony that captured the e pluribus unum, many into one greatness of the American experiment. And he called his tribute to the melting pot his American Symphony. There she lies, he imagined, the great melting pot. Listen, can't you hear the roaring and the bubbling? Yes, that great master metaphor of American racial and ethnic diversity comes from a musical fiction, a symphony that was never actually realized or performed. But Paul Whiteman, the so-called king of symphonic jazz, did try to make it a reality. And in 1930, at the end of his star-making vehicle, The King of Jazz, he performed what he called the melting pot of music, where the literal melting pot and the metaphorical melting pot collided. And there they were, troops of ethnic Americans dressed in their respective ethnic outfits, doing their respective ethnic dances, until Whiteman emerges atop in a large steaming cauldron, a giant melting pot made of alchemical musical potions and elixirs. And with the stir of his baton, in marched the ethnics and out marched the white Americans, all dressed in the same top hats and tails, all marching to the same beat of Stars and Stripes Forever. The music of the melting pot was like the melting pot itself. It was not a celebration of diversity, but an erasing of it. Melting does not preserve difference in cultural specificity and nationality. Melting creates oneness, sameness, and singleness. So it's time for a new musical metaphor. Let's replace the melt with the mix, the harmony of the symphony with the juggle of the crossfade. Because to crossfade is to combine without erasing, to openly pursue the multiple, not the singular, the both and, not one or the other. To crossfade is to respect your sources enough that you know them back and forth, Crossfading is an argument for culture, society, and identity as a mixture of disparate elements, as spaces where diversity and difference can be sustained and kept alive. To crossfade is to embrace what Timothy Morton has called the ecological thought, the ways we imagine how we live together, how existence is always coexistence. To crossfade is to diffuse some power, to dabble in anarchy, to refuse a single voice speaking to many, and instead to listen for the voice of many speaking and listening at once in the same chorus. To crossfade is to sustain multiple realities at once, while queuing up another, playing one and fading it into another, finding a new mix for life. To crossfade is to listen for edges and borders, not centers. It is to listen for the places where the lines blur, where languages trade tongues. In other words, to crossfade is to get with the birds and inhabit what the poet Stanley Plumley once called the abrupt edge. And the abrupt edge that I mostly think about these days is a very specific one, the US-Mexico border. And that border reminds us that we need the crossfader more than ever before. Because in the age of economic globalization, in the age when wealth, information, and equality flow unevenly across a world divided up by a western wall of borders and checkpoints that stop people in their tracks, in the age of marathon bombs and prison sterilizations and force-fed hunger strikes, in the age of Trayvon, we need to crossfade, to think horizontally, to stay open to the new, to create bridges where none exist. We need new models of action and agency that allow us to mix faster than the market does, or louder than the market does, or more stealthily than the market does, to envision new ways of moving through the world and imagining and enacting new social orders, new methods for living and acting otherwise. How can music be both a reflection of society and a model for new forms of social action? Or let's just start here. What is the relationship between music and the hope of a better life? In our age of drones and deportations, how can music help close what the novelist Teju Cole has called the empathy gap? Crossfading requires an ethical relationship to the world. It requires empathy and openness. Or to paraphrase Dr. King, the crossfader bends or curves toward social justice. And so let me cue up another record from the poet Yehuda Amichai. I believe with perfect faith at this very moment that millions of human beings are standing at crossroads and intersections, in jungles and deserts, showing each other where to turn. There, over there, not that there, the other there, as in some ancient rite. This too is a new religion. I believe with perfect faith at this very moment. And I believe that crossfading is the right of this new faith, of this new religion. But in the sense of that word's root, it is a binding and it is a tying together. When we crossfade, we join the seemingly unjoinable. It is a spirituality of the edge of the bridge and the crossroads. It thrives at the X, at the crossing point, at the junction, where we leave and arrive, enter and exit, where we survive in the jungle and thrive in the desert, where we are open and closed and open again. And I want to end with one final question from this man, the Egyptian lover, who asked, what is a DJ if he can't scratch? Now, he asked that question back in the 1980s. But in the global 21st century, when there are over 200 million international migrants moving across the world, when, as I'm sure you've all noticed in the past month, boat after boat of migrants from Africa have ended up shipwrecked and stranded and drowning off the coasts of Europe, when the increasingly dominant way of life is the juggling of homelands, identities, flags, and nations, and the peril and danger of all of that juggling, we need a new version of Egyptian Lover's very important question. And I'm inspired by asking that question by the guys in Ozo Motley. Raul was here last night, I'm not sure if he's still here, who helped me first think of how to ask this new question. What is a DJ if he can't scratch? But what is a DJ if he can't scratch to Indian Bhangra, or Ethiopian funk, or Brazilian samba, or since we're coming to you live from DC and I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, What is a DJ who can't scratch a little go-go with Vicente Fernandez? Who doesn't know how to transform scratch the classic weeper Volver, Volver? And we can pose this same question to Rio, to Amsterdam, to Monterrey, to Montreal, to Beirut, to Cairo and Delhi, and yes, even to Sanford, Florida. And we can hear it answered in the global base of Egyptian techno-shabi, South African Cueto, and Portuguese Kuduro, and Puerto Rican reggaeton, and Brazilian baile funk, and Dutch mumbaton. On dance floors and public squares across the world, the technique of the crossfade has become a way of living, a way of reimagining identity and belonging in the age of globalization. So the challenge that faces the contemporary DJ, I want to suggest, is the challenge that faces us all. What are we as a society if we don't know how to sustain a mix? If we lack the archive, if our crates are full of the same records? What are we if we can't recognize multiple traditions, sounds, and styles? What are we if we can't live in the cut and prosper in the fade? What are we if we stop listening for the points of connection, for all those rubs and those scratches and all of those fades? And more importantly, if we do listen for them but we don't hear them, how do we then take crossfading into our own hands and make the mixes that we want to hear? How do we become not just consumers or receivers of the mix, but its agents and enablers? And that is a question, I believe, for recording academies as much as it is for museums, as much as it is for foundations, as it is for universities, as community centers, as for policymakers, who are all thinking in one way or another through the all of it. Which means, yes, this is about streaming and copyright and revenue streams, but it's also about global health and water crises and prison overpopulations and rampant food insecurity, endemic poverty and crumbling education, urban sustainability, the marketization of life, and the price tag of the self. Life and death and money and life and death and money. And it's that final question that I want to, that final question for the future of music that I want to leave us with. Very simply, what is the society if it can't crossfade? Thank you very much. Some chatter? Okay. I don't know if anyone wants to had any questions, or I guess questions. Soliloquies? Questions.
There's our chatterer.
We have a chatterer? Any questions before we move on to the next session? Sure.
So thank you for delivering. That was amazing. I like it for as. Yeah, you touched on so many things that I think mean so much to us as we sort of contemplate the next generation and what we're doing and why we're doing it, which I thought was fabulous. I loved the metaphor of the crossfade. And as someone who works on, right now, 1920s and 30s jazz and the whole symphony, it really, yeah, we're in a very different place. So I'm wondering, how do you, in your work, take it beyond talking to a group of us? I mean, how do you think musicians today can connect and make some of this social change?
So thank you for that question. I think the first answer is to keep taking this idea to different audiences. So both by myself, but also, as I mentioned, with my partner in crime on this, J. Period, we've been giving these presentations in different venues. So at museums, we've been working with the folks at Grammy U to work with students. I did some work with some councils, the Council on Foundations a few years ago, really trying to figure out how can non-musicians start to think like crossfaders. Is something I'm very interested in. So, for example, how can we get to, foundations to start having artists in residence as part of foundation work, so that musicians can help policymakers use musical aesthetics as ways of thinking about social action. So the goal of the Crossfader as a talk is not to exist as a talk, or even as something that maybe will never be published, but is really meant to be a kind of initiative and starting point to get those who are working in the public sphere to rethink the way they're listening, to rethink the way they're approaching identity and culture, and to really take it to multiple audiences. That's the whole point. As an academic, I tend to think myself, try to push myself to think as a crossfader, so that I don't think about, let's say, what I do on the campus or in the classroom. That's one input. The other input might be, a street corner in Los Angeles. The other input might be a museum in Los Angeles. It might be this conference. And it's not choosing one over the other. It's about finding that common middle language that allows me to kind of match beats, if you will, or match samples, to create new kinds of languages that hopefully do something to the audience, to create a new kind of public in front of anyone who is doing that kind of mixing and crossfading. So it's a challenge at this point, and I'm just kind of starting to think about how we can actually mobilize it. But I hope becomes a helpful model for folks in rethinking the way that identity and community work. Thanks. Morning.
Oh, you can hear. Oh, hi.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that I really appreciated your presentation. It was great. And thank you specifically for saying in the age of Trayvon Martin 3 times. I think in my experience, it seems to always be the question of, what are black people going to do about racism? What are Hispanic people going to do about immigration? And I think we all know the truth about, who runs our country and who runs our world. And I think it's past due time for people of the Caucasian persuasion to be more empathetic. I'm reading a book right now called Emotional Intelligence, and I'm learning a great deal from it. It's by an author named Daniel Goleman, and it feels like it's just opening up a whole new part of me in terms of intelligence and working with and being around other people. So I just really appreciate what you had to say. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
We got one more, and then we got
one more right here.
So I've been listening to a lot of remix artists lately, and I'm interested about what you think the future of the remix artist is in respect to this cultural, the crossfading kind of cultural movement that you're speaking about.
Boy, that's a long one. But I think certainly, it's telling that, let's say on a website like Hype Machine, if you use Hype Machine, you can go there and there's different categories you can click on to organize your listening. What's been posted now, the most popular songs, and then remixes, right? So that now remixes become its own genre, its own place of work, its own site. And I think that a large part of that is because of this trajectory that I was trying to lay out, that I'm not the first to do from the 1970s onward, of when the mix becomes the centerpiece of musical production. So in a way, everything that everyone's doing right now is in a sense a remix, because people are playing with parts, especially if you look at Pro Tools production, right? Even more basic GarageBand. There's a kind of remixology at work in so much of culture. So the future of it is, I think it's going to be, on the one hand, more and more and more. On the other, we might actually see a return to a kind of rejection of that aesthetic, which is always possible. But I certainly think the idea of mixture is nothing new. Mixture isn't new to new technologies. That's at the core of what music has always been. But crossfading as a practice, as a philosophy, that's what I'm interested in, is how can we start to think like DJs who crossfade, which is to say, how do we think in such a way that we're listening for places to connect? So if there's more remixes than ever before, fantastic. But what's being remixed? What's the history of those samples? And why did that artist decide to make that point of connection, that slide between this sound and that sound? Why that moment? And we need to listen for those moments, because those moments, I think, hold the key to understanding larger issues of identity and all sorts of equity issues that we're going to be facing with even more intensity in the future.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks.